without anybody meaning anything by it, it's just part of our mainstream American culture. Any individual from the humblest origins can climb to well-being. I call that one the Abe Lincoln myth. Doesn't matter. It's also that any little boy in America could be president. Really? Probably not. Not a bad thing to believe, because it's a very hopeful message, and it's about potential as possibility, which is never a bad place to be. But if you believe that anyone, no matter how humble their start, really can climb into whatever your version of well-being means, then you're going to carry that belief with you in your work with your clients. Then number 2 is, and this is more puritanical, I think this is kind of more back to the Pilgrims. The failure to achieve well-being through hard work indicates that you have a flawed character. The Puritans and some of their associate different peer groups in that era actually believed that you were born, pretty much it was all predestination. So you were born, your life was already charted, and people did arrive as babies with flaws that no matter what they did, that was it, they were going to be that way. They were in their communities, they cared about them, but everybody just knew they were never going to succeed because they had an inherent character flaw that they had been born with. So just think about that one. If you can't pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, are you a flawed individual? Is it something inherent inside of you that can never be overcome? And then what does that mean exactly? And then the last one is much more recent. This one comes out of beginning in the 1960s. Because some of you actually remember Kennedy and that whole era, I will say, which I've abandoned saying now, that from 1960 until 1979, social programs in the United States, social initiatives, the war on poverty, all kinds of nationwide programs were very generously federally funded in order to really move the United States into being a country in the world where we did not have devastating poverty.
I remember that.
Yeah, well I do too, it didn't work. But in 1980, it was because I actually was old. On January 1st, 1980, millions and billions of dollars dried up. And those federally funded social programs began to die and wither. And they did. But the cultural belief, the myth that came out of that era is actually society is responsible for poverty, because if we had never invested in those programs and built all those high-rise public housing units and given all those people money for food, we wouldn't be in this mess now, because now they expect the housing and the food. They expect those things. Society is responsible for racism, bad schools, bad neighborhoods. The individual is a victim of society, is that last one. So you can turn on talk radio and hear that one any hour.
Yeah.
Very alive and well.
Yeah.
I look at those 3, and the second 2 are so obviously myths that it's not, to me, worthy of discussion. Your stand on the first one bothers me a lot, because aren't there examples of people who have, and other than Abraham Lincoln, who have started off basically at the very low rungs of society and climbed into great corporate wealth or all sorts of political office?
Amazing examples.
Which tells me that that any given, and maybe given needs to be in there, any given individual can do that. Not every, certainly, or not even anything like very many of them. But I still don't see that any individual can climb to well-being is a myth.
Well, the reason that you heard about it is because it was such a big deal.
Yeah, well,
That's
no,
why
and I
you
don't
heard
disagree
about
with you. Women could say the same thing. So when Marie Curie discovered radium and became a famous woman scientist in the 1860s, we could have, well, any woman could have done that, right? I mean,
yeah.
It's any is the some, few, and I can guarantee you, and this is also in a lot of the literature, that when that happens to somebody, they have a lot of help.
Oh,
They
yeah.
have a
I'm not
lot
saying
of
they don't, you know.
And that help is not available to any individual. That's the thing.
See, but you're kind of therefore kind of substituting every for any, to me.
Well, what is the belief though? Is it, I mean, so think about the United States as a country where any little boy, and we would hope maybe now girl, could grow up to be president. When I talked about how language is so powerful and every word we use matters, that word any is the critical piece of this one. It doesn't say some, and it doesn't say any given, it doesn't say a few,
yeah.
and it
And
doesn't.
I'll go along with you right there.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
It's
was
the-
kind of the way it is. I think
Yeah.
it's, you know, we're getting into semantics.
Right.
definitely.
well, and that's a provocative part of the training. I had one guy, and I was doing this training for a board of directors of a nonprofit. He couldn't sit down the rest of the training after he saw this screen. And he came over to me afterwards and said, I believe that. And I said, yeah, I can tell. That's okay. I'm just telling you what's in the literature. That's right. However, if you're going to do this important work with our kids who need CASAs, you're going to hit the individual who has never, ever,
Mhm. Oh,
Well, and that's the whole point of this, is to
yeah, never had that chance or that
be
support.
aware of this, and
Yeah.
this affects how we
Yeah.
maybe want to interact with
Well, and I
people.
have a story that goes with this one. And I have another screen with a quote on it too that will help maybe flesh this out a little bit. Because the whole idea is just to make you guys think about this. And it was also the reason we tested this training lot before we took it anywhere. I was a wreck the first time I had to do this presentation in North Carolina, and I had a very ethnically diverse audience. I looked at my boss and said, you gotta be kidding me, there's gonna be stuff in here that's gonna be really not okay. And it actually went okay, but
Dana, is it sort of like the myths of what people say, sort of like, well, if they wanted to, they'd be working?
yep.
Or, well, your kid was taken away from you and it's in my care because of what you did?
Yeah,
You know,
that
stuff
you
like
had
that.
you had
That you-
100%.
yeah, well, you're
we
not looking at
assume
the
that
overall
individual has
picture.
a lot more control than they do. So the story that goes with this is a real story. I asked one of our attorneys one day at Legal Services. I said, Amy, tell me a story. I need stories for my training. And she said, oh, she had a client in Missoula. Amy's in the Helena office. A young woman with a visual disability who had an 18-month-old daughter. She had been living with her mom, but had succeeded in getting into school, had a part-time job, had child care for her child, and had gotten her own housing. Was navigating the community fine using buses, and was doing really well. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but in a lot of the programs, the resource-based programs, clients have to actually have regular contact with their program, and they have to show their paycheck stubs two to four times a year, depending on the program. They have to show up and verify they're still employed or not employed. It's one of those things they have hoops. That makes them one of the most highly scrutinized. The rest of us only have to do that when we pay our taxes every year, right?
Right.
And in most programs, there's a 3 strikes and you're out. You miss 3 meetings and they pull the resource. So this young woman, her mom would take her to important meetings like that because her mom lived in town and had a car. The first morning she had her appointment, her mom called her that morning and said, I'm really sorry, but I got really sick last night and I can't get in the car and get you to this meeting. So she called her caseworker and said, I need to reschedule. That was strike 1.
Even though she called to reschedule.
So now she's down to 2. And that's policy. I mean, that's absolutely policy driven. It's not discretion driven. Although some workers would have, but she wrote down the time wrong. So she's got a visual impairment. She has a toddler tugging at her. She's on the phone and nervous because she's calling to say, I can't make it.
Can't make it.
So she wrote the time down wrong for her second meeting. But not by very much wrong. It was like a 30-minute gap or
But
something.
it was later
Yeah.
than what she should have
Right.
been there.
And so
she's
she
late.
got to the next meeting, and she usually tried to get there early, so she was about only 15 minutes off when she got there. Caseworker came out and said, policy says if you're more than 10 minutes late, I don't have to meet with you, I'm rescheduling the meeting, I won't meet with you.
It's 2 strikes.
2 strikes, 2. This really happened. Yeah. And, she's down to one chance left and she's gonna lose her housing, because this was her housing office, it was her public housing. Yeah.
You guys, I took a lady today, that boy, that's it home. She's been going through cancer, right, chemotherapy and everything, and, she's a waitress. Honest to God, she brings home, I see her paycheck, $300 and some, working 40 hours a week, waiting tables, clear. That's what she brought home, clear. They count tips that she gets. Anyway, I gave her a ride to Section 8. That helps pay her rent.
Yeah.
Okay, first thing was she got a letter, and I looked at all of these. She got the first letter saying your appointments are at this time to sign up, and then your inspection for your appointment is this time. So she made arrangements to miss work hours, to go to that. And here she was paying people $10 to take her one way. And I heard about her, you know, I live by her, and I said, man, just get in my car. And she looked at me and she says, we hardly have any gas. I said, you know what, I'll get us where we're going. And she just looked at me, you know. Because I was on fumes, but I thought, $10. I mean, and
You're better off than she is.
and then if she was paying them $20 one way for the grocery store. So anyway, I took her. She had these appointments set. Then she gets a letter, a phone call from the Section 8 caseworker saying, I need to change your appointment. I have sick kids. So Margie said, okay. Made arrangements again at her job. In the meantime, she gets a call about a cancer on a doctor's appointment that she cannot miss. So she calls the inspection guy and says, I can't make this appointment due to a doctor's appointment. I need to reschedule.
And remember, they will come in and go through your
Your
house
house.
with a fine-tooth comb twice a year.
And then,
And you have to let them in.
Yeah.
so she goes, oh, and she gets this letter from the inspection guy. I remember shaking my head. It says, and if you miss more than 3, or was it 2? I can't remember.
Inspection.
It's chance for you to lose your housing. And I thought, oh man. So I took her today at 2:30. And she goes in there, she went in there, and I went in there with her, because she was just all nervous to get out. They let me go in, because confidentiality, she asked. So, first thing the caseworker said to her was, inspection needs to reschedule. And I thought to myself, oh my God, and you're telling her 2 times, 3 times.
And
her
she just
housing.
found out she has cancer.
And
right?
all she did was she grabbed my hand,
Yeah.
put her head down, and she just squeezed it. And I felt myself getting really hot.
Because that'd be the 3rd time she has to go to her boss and say,
Yeah.
now I need a
Yeah,
schedule.
and
she's not
Plus, I
making
just
much
found out
money
I was
anyway.
sick.
Yeah. And this is to hope that she gets help with her rent. Just to hope.
Right, so
That
she's
she
not even
gets-
got it yet.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just, you know, after a while when they were getting close down to all her paperwork and stuff, I said, I'll wait for you out in the car. And I just went in tears. Because, you know, I thought, there's so much out here.
Imagine that level of scrutiny in your life, and imagine having to have it and go along and not say anything in the meetings because you don't dare piss them off.
No.
Or, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so in this story, this caseworker did refuse to see her even though she was in the office, and the caseworker didn't have another meeting. And so the 3rd time, that morning, there's a whole, I won't take the time, but how she would ended up being another 10 minutes late, but they yanked her housing. And she and her little one mom couldn't move back in with her mom at that point because something else had happened, had to go into the homeless shelter, which meant that she lost her daycare, her job, and had to stop going to school. And that was why Legal Services took her case, and they took her through the fair hearing process and got her housing back. But now she had no job, she was behind credits in school, tuition money was gone, and she didn't get the same house back. At the end of her fair hearing, she said to her attorney, Amy, could you ask them to give me a different caseworker? Because the other thing is, it's not over. She got housing back. but it's the same agency, the same roles, it's the same. So
Well, now they're probably kind of ticked. If
well,
it's that
and then
same
actually no, they
caseworker.
said no, she can't have a different caseworker. And then that point, Amy came unglued and said,
Mhm.
"Oh, I'm pretty sure she can have a different caseworker." And,
Yeah.
and she has a different caseworker now, but you know the turnover's pretty high. I mean, those are jobs where it's.
But then they work as a tag team in
Well,
the
they,
background.
they can work it.
Yeah,
That can
that's what I
happen.
mean.
It
It's
doesn't
like-
always, but it can. So
Wow.
that young woman is not getting the breaks
Mhm.
that a person who does manage to come out of poverty or some other kind of challenge, she's not. No one's given. She's not getting the breaks. And I think all of those success stories, I just don't have any doubt, they had mentors, they had people who
There was
were looking,
relationship
they had
support
people who
around
steered in the
her.
right way. That doesn't happen for everybody.
What happened to that woman that wouldn't meet with her? Because she was
She's still there.
demonstrating?
Well, she didn't have to. Policy said so.
Policy
Was there?
says.
She's still
Do
there.
people just get really callous?
Yep.
I mean,
Big time.
obviously they get
Yeah.
really callous.
Well, and some people serve that way.
social workers or just?
They
No,
now at the
not
public
all
services,
of them,
they
no.
no.
They don't even, I know one that's there that doesn't even have a 12, you know, and I don't think degrees, high school diploma or degrees necessarily work. You
Yeah.
know, my personal opinion is voice of experience
Well, and
and
having
training.
an
It's
awareness
just not,
of
yeah.
where you're at, because you bring yourself into every one of these meetings with your clients and the little kiddos. You bring yourself in there, and if you don't have this self-awareness, you're going to bring your belief system in to whatever the problem is. So I want to make sure we get to talk about talking to kids. So I'm going to whip through some of this kind of quickly, but so really, different is just different, right? People who live in poverty without enough resources every day just have a different kind of a life than you do if you have a middle class paycheck and cars and a house. And I can walk out my door if my car doesn't start. I've got 5 different ways to get to work on time and get my kids what they need. I can use a credit card, write checks, call my mom, call my husband, go to the neighbors, call my friends. They don't have that. People who live in poverty do not need your assumptions or mine. And this is Ruby Payne. In general, people think it's a lack of financial resources. In reality, Ruby has identified 8 categories of resources that someone needs to actually move from poverty into a higher economic status. If I can remember, they are money, a support system, health to the extent that you can navigate the community freely, some kind of she doesn't call it spirituality, she doesn't really work for it, some sense of belonging to something larger than yourself is essential. So that's only 4 of them. And I can't retrieve the other 4. But any one of those, she said it takes all 8 in combination at once for a person to actually move out of poverty. And I don't think she's wrong necessarily. David Shipler had a way of saying it, and I like his because it's just simpler. He describes people who live in poverty live in a margin with no safety net. It's a very unforgiving place to be. So he says you need skills, a good starting wage, a job where promotion is possible, so that if you come in at minimum wage, there's somewhere to go in that company. And that's harder to find than you think. Clarity of purpose, courageous self-esteem, lack of substantial debt, freedom from illness or addiction, a functional family who watches you and supports you trying to move your life in a direction that may be different than theirs. A network of upstanding friends, and the right help from private or governmental agencies at the right time, really. A gap in that array is an entry point for trouble because being poor means being unprotected.
So is that the same factors
That
that
Ruby
are in
identified.
Ruby's?
Yeah, he just has different words for it, and they're just more descriptive than academic. And that's a really good book, The Working Poor. What we don't talk about very often is the strengths that people who live in poverty have. Flexibility, unbelievable flexibility. Get up every day, have no idea what's coming. gonna figure out how to solve it anyway. Tolerance. Tolerance for living in 700 square feet with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, living, dining area, 1 closet, 1 bathroom, and half the neighborhood running through your house every day, because that's what it takes to survive in the community, because you need those relationships. So you're feeding other people's kids, you're watching other people's kids, you're driving people places if you have a car, they're driving you places when your car doesn't work. The community is in your house, and if you have important papers or important belongings, it's very difficult to keep them safe and organized. That's what it's like in public housing units if you haven't ever spent any time there. Every single day, problem solving practice with very little notice. There's a chaos that goes with not having enough resources every day. It's very difficult to order your life when any one of those things might go south in any minute and you have no backup. So we don't talk about the strengths and skills of people who live in poverty as much as we probably should. The car won't start. No, this one's from one of the ones we did out of state. The neighbor who was watching your kids quits with no notice when you get to her door that morning and says, not watching your kids. Did I forget to tell you that? And you've got to be at work in 20 minutes. You get the sanction letter from food stamps that says, we're not giving you your food stamps because something went haywire in your fire. Only it wasn't your mistake. It was theirs. But guess what? When they make the mistake, it doesn't take any less time to fix it. So I've had that happen to clients. Clients didn't do anything. System screwed up. Same amount of time to fix the problem. Same impact on the client.
Did you guys know that there was a time that people within the last year to get on food stamps had to go and wait in line at 6:30 in the morning?
Yeah.
And just to hope that they would get seen, and they take what, the first 5?
It depended
Or
on the
first
day, I
3?
think. So every day, problems to solve, and very little margin for error. So what? That's what my husband always brings to my presentations. If I run him by him, he says, "Yeah, so." He's like, "Well, you have to say why. This is great data. It's really interesting. But why does this matter?" He's a lawyer. He's like, "Yeah, okay, honey, this isn't court." So what is, because I hope, if nothing else at this point, and I'm not going to do the last part, you can read the last part, but how you use labels and talk about it is going to be very powerful in how you do your work with these folks. Be aware of what your assumptions are. We all have assumptions. There's nothing wrong with that. We all have beliefs. It's really important that we all have beliefs. We all have to have core beliefs in order to be able to navigate life in a happy, healthy way. But they're not going to be the same core beliefs maybe that your clients are going to have. And you need to know that. Yours are not any better or worse. They're just different. You may be less frustrated when you understand the differences of poverty and you think about, really, how much in survival mode is this person who blew me off today, got really frustrated and didn't want to finish the meeting? Is that really about me? Because probably not. And as a matter of fact, if you get somebody who actually says how frustrated they are at you for how ridiculous this meeting is, they're showing a tremendous amount of courage, probably, if they, at least, unless they come in that way. Then they're just mad. But it's scary to tell people that this is ridiculous, even when it really is, in that system. And you will have better relationships with your clients and be a lot more effective. There is a lot of research about language, and also about the other things that come. Small living space. Think a lot about the amount of living space your clients may be in. Because if you don't have enough square feet for your stuff, and if there are always other people in your space, think how much energy that takes and how hard it is to always find your important papers when you've had 10 people through that day. And then, yeah, you can look at the rest of it. Buy Ruby's book. It's really cheap. It's called A Framework for Understanding Poverty. There's another one called The Culture of Poverty.
Both by her.
Yep. The big ones are, don't assume that your client is in control of their daily life, because they may not be. Don't assume that your client has got time to think the problem through and plan for the future, like everyone might be thinking they do. Because it actually takes time and energy to sit down and think things through. And uninterrupted time is really nice, and quiet is always good, and none of those things might exist for your client. And remember, this was initially designed for attorneys. And also that thinking ahead, anticipating what has not happened yet is a complex brain function. There's a lot of research on that. It requires time, concentration, and quiet. And if you're in survival mode, you cannot do that. You can tell them they have to, but they aren't going to do it. And we wouldn't be able to either. And then there's a bibliography. So that's the poverty part. And I want to talk to you about talking to kids, because that's, I have a